Hi Nine. So this video runs alongside the other Lesson 2 video that I've posted to you today. The topic today is about this Winter of Discontent speech, which is the opening speech in Richard III. And the two videos that I've uploaded, this one's the second one, the two videos are about helping you understand what that speech is about. So the first video contains a recap from the first lesson, and then Sir Ian McKellen delivering the Winter of Discontent speech. This video is a kind of a read through and analysis of that speech. I hope that's clear. So our aims for this lesson are hopefully quite straightforward. One is to understand what Richard is talking about, and two, to recognise some of the features in the speech. The first part of this lesson will deal with aim number one, and the second part of this video will deal with aim number two. So just so you know where you're going in this lesson, by the end of this video, or at the end of this video, I will set you this task. So I thought I'd just tell you it now, so you can have it ticking away in the back of your mind as you go through the lesson. The task is to select the 5 most important lines from Richard's The Winter of Discontent speech. And then for each of one of those 5 lines, I want you to write a translation, explain why that line is important, identify the features in the line, and then explain the effect of those features. Okay, so that's the task that you're going to be able to do at the end of the video. But I thought I'd just put it at the front so you know where you're going to. Right, so aim 1, understanding what Richard is talking about. Right, so on this slide and the following slides, you can see in the white text we have the original Shakespeare language, and in the yellow text we have a modern day translation which I've written for you. Okay, so as you read through the white, you can then look directly across the page onto the yellow side to see exactly what that line means. You've already seen the speech because you've watched Ian McKellen deliver it in the first video today, but here you've got the first chunk here. So read through it and look at the translation that goes alongside. Here's the second part of the speech, where he moves on to talking about himself a bit more. Obviously pause the video to give you more time to read it. The final part of the speech, again, pause the video so you've got more time to read it. He sets out, in this part of the speech, his plans and his strategy for the future. So now we're going to move on to the second aim of today's lesson, which is to recognise some of the features in the speech. Right, so first of all, here's the first chunk of the speech again. And as you can see in this grey box on the side here, we have the key features that I think are in this speech. So we've got metaphor in yellow, pronouns in green, alliteration in this light blue, personification is pink, and contrasts are red. Let's look at metaphor first. So the opening 2 lines is a metaphor. Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by the son of York. The idea is a shift from the winter of discontent, which is a metaphor for the war that they've just been fighting, into peacetime, which is the metaphor of glorious summer. And the idea that the son of York, transforming the new king, Edward, new King Edward, as being the sun that's risen and kind of ended winter and made summer come to life. So that's the metaphor. That's a seasonal metaphor. The war is the winter, and summer is peace. And the sun that's ended winter and made summer is the new king. Richard uses quite a lot of pronouns in this speech, and I've picked out here the use of the word our. Our is a collective pronoun, and it's a really powerful little word that brings the speaker in this case Richard, and the audience, the rest of the York family and the audience in the theatre, together into one group. It's a very collective pronoun that brings people together. So it's kind of unifying and uniting all the people in the theatre, all the people on stage. We're basically saying we're all on the same side. It's quite a powerful little word, has a big effect. Alliteration is dotted around this speech. As you know, alliteration is when a couple of words that are near to each other begin with the same letter. It makes these words stand out. It almost makes them just like ping out of the speech a little bit more. So brows bound, merry meeting, dreadful and delightful, fright and fearful, lascivious and lute. It just gives the speech a little bit more flair and more interest by putting these alliterations in. What else happens is it makes some of these words kind of link a bit more. So we have things like merry meetings, which makes it seem extra happy. But we've also got the contrasts of dreadful and delightful. And then the fright and the fear. It emphasizes certain sounds just stand out, which make those words really seem a bit more important. So alliteration is used to raise the importance of certain words and phrases. Personification is used by Richard to kind of give war a personality, to make it seem like it's a living thing, like a human. So the first one, Grim Visage War, has smoothed his wrinkled front. It's suggesting that war's got a face, and visage to grim visage is like a serious or even unpleasant face of war has been smoothed. His wrinkles have been smoothed out, so he looks more pleasant and more gentle and more attractive than he had done. So war is still there, but he's just changed his appearance, and now he looks much more attractive. And rather than fighting and having battles, what war is doing now in the second bit of personification is it says he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber, which basically means that war is no longer being a fighter. War is now trying to be a lover, and in a lady's chamber means in a lady's bedroom, and I'm sure you can imagine what war is trying to do there. In the red are all the contrasts, and as you can see, there's quite a lot of this part of the speech is using contrasts. So the opening lines are a contrast of winter and summer, suggesting a change in time, change in season. The second chunk of red, so we've got the idea of what they were doing and what they are doing now. So brows bound with victorious wreaths. That means we've now won the war. Now we've won the war, which means our bruised arms, so that the suits of armour that they've been wearing can be hung up for monuments. So rather than putting them on in the morning and going out to fight, the suits of armour now hang on the walls at home or stand on display. Our stern alarums change to merry meetings. So stern alarums are kind of emergency meetings and kind of this kind of panic situation as war and the battles break out. That's all ended, and now we can have these sweet merry meetings, which are much more pleasant. The dreadful marches, so as the soldiers and the generals would march through, going off to battle, have now changed to delightful measures. So much more pleasant and delightful things are happening rather than these dreadful marches. And obviously, the contrast of war and what war's changed from being this ugly, horrible looking thing into a much more pleasant and attractive face that is no longer focused on battle, but now focused on making love, not war. So the second chunk of Richard's speech, he moves away from the kind of the contrast and setting up the end of the war. He moves his focus a little bit more onto himself. And in the video, the first video for today, this is where Richard kind of moves from being on public display to being in a more private area of the palace. So physical description. First of all, he in this section of the speech really draws our attention to the way he looks, and he describes himself in these words. So he first of all says he's not shaped for sportive tricks. That means his body's not made for sport and tricks. And sportive tricks basically means fun. So the way he views himself is he's not a fun guy. Richard is not shaped for having fun times. He is a serious guy. He's been kind of his best at war, not fun. He says he's rudely stamped, suggesting that he's been kind of rude, is obviously quite unpleasant. Stamped, almost like being crushed. So it suggests that he's been damaged physically. His physical description is he's a damaged person. He looks damaged. Fair proportion would be kind of attractive proportion. So fair is kind of beautiful or attractive, and proportion means everything is balanced. So he brings up the idea of this perfect image, which is, of course, he hasn't got that. He calls himself deformed, unfinished, which is really negative words about himself. He uses the word lame, which suggests he can't walk properly, and unfashionable, that means he's out of time. No one really likes him. No one wants to be with him. It's quite a very, very negative description. And he finishes on the word deformity again, just to remind us that he sees himself and others see him as being a deformed person, someone who is not made properly. All this negativity uh, lends itself to self-loathing and to self-pity. And when you think about the effect of these lines, where he's telling us how unattractive he is and how much he doesn't like himself, the consequence of that is we might start to feel a bit sorry for him. We might start to look at Richard and go, "Oh, poor Richard, cheer up, lad. It's not the end of the world. You're not that bad looking. It's all going to be fine. Someone's going to like you." You know, this kind of negative tone that he's got about himself in the blue and the orange bits uh, make us possibly feel a little bit of sympathy towards him, like we almost might want to kind of try and cheer him up a little bit. He uses personification. He gives some objects a character or personality. So, for example, he talks about a looking glass, a mirror that he does not have this relationship with mirrors. He doesn't like looking at himself in the mirror. So, an amorous looking glass is like a loving looking glass. He does not love uh, the idea of looking in a mirror because it just reflects his own unpleasant appearance back at him. Dissembling nature, in the second bit of pink there, that personification suggests that nature is a cheater, that nature has deceived him by making him look so, or creating him in such an unfinished or deformed way. And breathing world gives a sense of the world being alive, being almost having lungs. So it suggests that that nature is against him, that he's some kind of abomination that nature has kind of created as almost like as a joke, as a trick. Got some alliteration, and like all alliteration, it makes certain words stand out. And in this case, there's a sense of bitterness that comes through with the piping time of peace. Remember, he hates peacetime. Peacetime is when he's kind of useless. He's best at being a general in the war and organising battles. Peacetime is not his strong point. The second one, descant on mine own deformity. That very negative last line. Descant means to kind of sing a different tune to everybody else. So in a choir, if you had a group of people singing, the main choir would sing the main melody of a song, but the descants would be given to certain individuals within the choir who would sing a different tune. Basically, he's saying using that word, that he is deliberately out of tune with everybody else, suggesting the way he looks makes him sound wrong to the people around him. But also with the word descant, it suggests that almost like he's glorifying his own difference, his own individuality, the fact that he's not like everybody else. In a sense, he's reveling in it a little bit. In the sense that he enjoys being the odd one out, and he doesn't mind standing out from the crowd because that makes him special. So that alliteration at the end there really kind of puts a strange spin on Richard's speech by giving him a bit more of an ego that actually possibly might suggest that he enjoys being the odd one out that people find disgusting to look at. So the final part of Richard's speech, this is where he kind of starts talking about his plan and what he intends to do in the rest of the play. So the first bit in blue is where he justifies his own self. He says, "And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasures of these days. He's basically saying there, because I'm no good at being a lover, because I'm no good at peacetime, what choice have I got? I'm going to have to be the bad guy, and I'm going to have to kind of destroy everything. Okay? So that's what he's saying. Is basically, because the way I look, the way people treat me, I'm going to have I can't enjoy peacetime. I'm going to have to be the bad guy and ruin it. In green, we've got his villain narrative coming through. He's kind of telling us his plan so that we know what's going on in his head, and it kind of makes us a little bit on his side. It's like he's the big bad villain, and we're kind of hearing his plan, but we're unable to stop him. It makes him look very powerful that he can just be so open with us, the audience, because we can't stop him. So he says things like, "Plots have I laid." So basically, I've got a plan, I've got a plot, and it's already in place. Induction's dangerous. So lies, things that aren't true, by drunken prophecies, libels, dreams. So he's made up a load of lies and nonsense in order to kind of create what he hopes is this kind of negative effect, as he says, to set my brother Clarence and the king in deadly hate against the one against the other. So he's made up a load of lies and a load of nonsense that's going to make his two brothers, George the Duke of Clarence and Edward the King, hate each other. So that's this plan, to drive a huge wedge between his brothers, so they end up wanting to kill each other. The second part of his plan is that basically Clarence, his brother George, is going to get arrested because one of the lies that he's told the king is that someone named beginning with G is going to kill your children, King Edward. So who's the closest person whose name begins with G? Oh, George. So that's why George has been arrested. Bear in mind, though, that Richard's title is a Duke of Gloucester, and that also begins with G. Contrast has been a feature earlier on in the speech, and it comes back here too. He paints a different picture of what the king is like. So the king is true and just. Which makes the king seem like a good person. And then he talks about Richard himself again. He says subtle, false, and treacherous. So there's again that contrast of being the king being the good guy, of being a noble character, and Richard being the villain who is evil and nasty. And the speech ends with some self-control. He is able to kind of calm himself down, his dive thoughts down to myself. So don't put all these thoughts behind me. Here comes Clarence. Here Clarence comes. So at the end of the speech, his brother George, is coming on stage. So he has to now pretend to like his brother again in order to make the plan. So he's an actor. He has shown to us in this speech his true nature, but he's going to pretend now to be a nice brother again in order to manipulate Clarence. So now, hopefully, you can complete your task, which was to select the 5 most important lines from Richard's The Winter of Discontent speech, and then for each line, write a translation into modern English. You can use the yellow translation earlier on in this video if you want to, but you need to explain why that line is important, then identify the features in the line, and explain the effect of the features. So, good advice would be to watch the video again, and hopefully you'll find the answers that you're looking for here. Okay? Let me know if you've got any problems on Google Classroom. In the meantime, have a nice day, and I'll speak to you again tomorrow.